He always insisted that black people were born inferior to white people. To prove his point, he ruthlessly sawed open the skull of a black man. On the inside of this man's occipital bone, there were 3 distinct dimples that white people did not have. He claimed this was the root cause of slavery in black people and hastily concluded that black people were inferior to white people down to their very bones. Therefore, white people always viewed black people as livestock, buying and selling them as they pleased, exploiting their labor however they wanted, and stripping them of their freedom for life. But are black people truly born with a servile nature, willing to let others order them around? It was truly a turning of the world upside down, disrupting all social order. Not only did white people mock him, but even his fellow black countrymen despised him. This action immediately angered him. Before the white man could draw his gun, he pointed his gun at that man. What made people even more unexpected was that he not only enjoyed the same treatment as white people but also dared to kill those cruel white men for the dawn of black freedom. He is Django. However, just a few months prior, Django was still a slave waiting to be sold at the market, wearing iron shackles, dragging his feet, herded by slave traders like livestock. Suddenly, a horse-drawn carriage with a large tooth on top approached. The man on the carriage claimed to be a dentist and wanted to buy a slave to work for him. The dentist required a black man who had worked at the plantation. Luckily, Django happened to meet this requirement. The dentist approached Django to talk. Seeing the two whispering, the slave trader immediately became alert, raised his gun, and insisted that Django was not for sale. Seeing this, the dentist didn't waste words with him. He raised his hand and blew one man's head off with a shot, then shot another horse in the head. After this lightning-fast action, the dentist didn't forget to politely step forward and apologize. "I'm terribly sorry, you people threatened me with guns first." After that, he went to Django to confirm his question one more time, then smiled brilliantly at Django. Unlike those white slave owners, the dentist not only let Django wear the slave trader's coat but also let him ride a horse instead of walking. Seeing the scars covering Django's back, the dentist was even more moved. Then, he pretended to pay for the slave and simply led his newly purchased Django away. The next day, the two arrived at a small town. Wherever they went, people looked at them with astonished eyes. A black man not even worthy of wearing chains was riding a horse. It was truly the world turned upside down. However, the dentist had no prejudice at all and led Django straight into a saloon. This action scared the wits out of the bar owner, who only served white people. He hurriedly ran out to call for help. The dentist calmly sat and drank beer with Django. Not long after, the sheriff walked in with a gun, demanding the two leave the saloon for interrogation. Looking at the black gun barrel pointed at them, the two had to obediently walk out. Yet, before the sheriff could ask two questions, the dentist suddenly drew his gun and shot the sheriff down. Before he could crawl away, the dentist fired another shot. The crowd watching the commotion was scared into scattering. This action surprised even Django. The marshal heard the news and immediately led men to surround the saloon, demanding the two surrender. However, the dentist inside the saloon was unflinching. He walked out with a calm face holding a file. It turned out he was a bounty hunter. The sheriff he shot dead was a criminal wanted by the government for 2 years. Not only did he not have to take responsibility, but the marshal also had to pay him a $200 reward. Looking at the documents in his hand, the marshal had to let them go. Stopping to rest on the road, the dentist revealed the reason for buying Django. It turned out his important target recently was the Brittle brothers. They had changed their names and hidden for many years. The dentist didn't recognize them, so he needed help, and Django, who knew them, naturally became the top choice. The dentist promised that after everything was done, he would not only give Django a sum of money but also restore his freedom. Then he asked Django, "If you were free, what would you do?" Django replied with a serious face, "I will go find my wife." It turned out that with his stubborn nature, he had once run away with his wife, but they were caught by the slave owner not long after. To punish Django, the slave owner deliberately sold the couple to two different places. From then on, he never saw his wife again. Now, finding his wife was the only motivation for him to keep living. Hearing that the three Brittle brothers might be hiding in a plantation, to avoid alerting the enemy, the dentist disguised himself as a wealthy merchant. He then let Django choose a set of clothes he liked and told him to pose as his valet. A black man wearing luxurious clothes riding a horse. This scene looked both unbelievable and funny. Sure enough, the slave owner looked very annoyed seeing Django dressed so extravagantly. In his heart, black people had no right to enjoy such things. The dentist saw through it all. Not wanting to drag things out, he stated directly that he came to buy slaves at a high price. The slave owner's attitude changed immediately, and he hastily invited the two into the house. While the dentist and the slave owner were discussing the transaction, Django took the opportunity to search for the targets on the plantation. By asking a female servant, he quickly identified the location of the three Brittle brothers. When he saw that face, memories of the past flooded Django's mind in an instant. It was the man who had whipped him years ago. At this moment, he was preparing to whip another female slave. Seeing this, Django approached with a face full of rage. Just as the female slave was about to be beaten, he appeared like a savior to stop it. Seeing a slave dressed so luxuriously, the Brittle brothers couldn't believe their eyes. Before they could react, Django raised his hand and shot one dead, then used a whip to knock another to the ground. Seeing this scene, the surrounding black slaves were stunned. They couldn't imagine that a black man dared to hit a white man on a slave plantation. Therefore, many curious slaves gathered around. After beating him to vent his anger, Django drew his gun in front of everyone and ended the second man's life. At the same time, hearing the commotion, the dentist rushed over. Confirming there was one left, he quickly raised his gun. That man was riding a horse trying to flee but ultimately couldn't escape the dentist's marksmanship. Hearing gunshots, the slave owner led a group of men and horses running over. The dentist used his old trick, presenting his identity as a bounty hunter. Although extremely angry, in the face of a wanted warrant permitted by law, the owner had to swallow his pride. Just like that, the dentist and Django left with three bodies intact. However, as soon as night fell, the slave owner led a group of men to chase after them. A black man daring to kill people on his farm was something he absolutely could not tolerate. However, the dentist, being a bounty hunter, was no pushover. He had anticipated the slave owner would do this, so he secretly placed a lot of explosives on the wagon. Waiting until they got close to the wagon to check, the dentist, hiding on the mountain, only needed one shot to accurately detonate the wagon. Half of the slave owner's men were killed immediately, the rest fled in terror. Seeing the slave owner was still alive and trying to run, the dentist handed the gun to Django. Unexpectedly, Django took down the slave owner with just one shot. This natural marksmanship surprised the dentist greatly. Having resolved the danger, the two could finally eat in peace. Seeing that Django was a talent, the dentist said, "Why don't you continue working with me? After this winter ends, I will help you find your wife." He also promised to share 1/3 of the bounty with Django for each mission. Hearing this, Django was a bit suspicious but agreed immediately. After all, getting to kill white people and getting money for it, what could be better? The next day, Django changed into a new battle outfit. The two bought new horses, and from there, one black and one white, they stepped onto the path of bounty hunting. That day, they went to a hillside preparing to execute a new mission because the wanted criminal's son was always by his side. Django aimed at the target but hesitated to fire. In his heart, he still held a bit of kindness toward this world. To encourage him, the dentist took out the criminal's wanted warrant, recounting his crimes of murder and robbery, and stated bluntly that after completing the mission, there would be a $7,000 reward. Finally, Django hesitated no more and pulled the trigger to end him. In the time that followed, the two continuously carried out bounty hunting missions. Django also accumulated a lot of combat experience, his draw speed became faster, and his accuracy improved significantly. With the seamless coordination of the two, even when facing a gang of criminals in difficult missions, they could easily complete them. Just like that, the whole winter passed in the blink of an eye, and the two earned pockets full of money. The next mission was to find Django's wife. First, they went to a small town known as a slave trading hub. Through checking transaction records, the dentist quickly found Django's wife. She had been sold to a notorious plantation, and the owner was an inhumane white man named Candie. However, if they simply wanted to buy a female slave and trade with Candie, it wasn't really feasible. Stealing directly would violate the law, and robbing blatantly might not succeed. Therefore, the dentist came up with a cunning plan. Django would pose as a slave trader specializing in black fighters, Mandingo fighting. They would spend a large sum to buy a group of fighters and then buy Django's wife incidentally. But they didn't expect that Candie was not a simple person, but rather a crazy and arrogant man. When the dentist and Django arrived at Candie's mansion, there were many black slaves there. They had clear work assignments, everyone had a suitable position. Under the guidance of his private lawyer, the two met Candie, the cruel man of legend. Unlike other slave owners, Candie discriminated against the black slaves around him, even favoring the beautiful female slaves. At that moment, in the room, two black fighters were fighting fiercely. People around couldn't look straight at this bloody scene, only Candie got more excited the more he watched. Finally, he threw a hammer to the winner, ordering him to finish off the loser. Facing such a dehumanized person, Django showed no fear. Even when speaking, he carried a provocative tone. Although Candie felt insulted, he tried to suppress his anger. After all, no one makes things difficult for people bringing money to their door. Right at this moment, the dentist hurriedly coordinated the act. If there is a suitable person, I am willing to pay a sky-high price of $12,000. This huge sum immediately interested Candie. The next day, Candie led the two to his arena, where his strongest fighters were. On the way, Django was completely immersed in the role of a slave trader. Facing the mockery of a white man, he immediately fought back, even knocking both the man and his horse to the ground. Seeing a conflict about to break out, Candie intervened in time. Continuing on the road, to further solidify his identity, Django shouted warnings at the black slaves nearby, even bluntly calling them a bunch of idiots. This action not only caught Candie's attention but also made the dentist nervous. So he hurriedly advised Django not to do stupid things to provoke Candie anymore, or else they would all die there. Although Django knew he was acting, something had changed in his heart. Approaching the plantation, they discovered a black fighter trying to run away. The black man, chased by white men with dogs, climbed a tree and dared not come down. Seeing this, Candie hurriedly told everyone to pull the dogs back and pretended to tell the black man, "It's okay, come down." It turned out this black man was bought by Candie for $500, and now, before fighting a single match, he wanted to run away. This made Candie extremely angry. The dentist, knowing Candie's cruel methods well, hurriedly said he was willing to pay to buy this black man back. Unexpectedly, Django, a black man like him, suddenly spoke up, "We don't need to waste a single penny on him." Django knew that this kindness would only arouse suspicion. Therefore, the dentist had to retract his kindness. Candie felt very confused, however, with his cunning nature, he didn't intend to let this go. Candie calmly walked up to Django, "If you don't want to save him, then I'll show you a good show." He ordered his subordinates to release the dogs to maul the black fighter to death. Django had no other choice, so he had to pretend to be ruthless, only then could he gain Candie's trust. Not long after, everyone arrived at Candyland. The butler was an old black slave with a limp named Stephen. He had served Candie's family for decades, and the slave mentality was ingrained in his bones. Although he was black, he wholeheartedly protected the interests of white people. So when he saw Django riding a horse, he couldn't help but hurl insults. It wasn't until Candie stated Django's identity that he stopped nagging. He simply didn't allow any black person to have a higher status than himself. At the same time, Candie's sister also came out to welcome them. Knowing beforehand that Django's wife spoke German, the dentist took this opportunity to request a female slave who knew German to serve him in the evening so he could close the next deal. Candie agreed immediately and mentioned Django's wife's name right away. However, the old butler said it wasn't very convenient because she had tried to run away a few days ago and was currently locked in the hot box. The so-called hot box was actually just a box buried in the ground. Seeing his wife tortured like that, Django looked on with a breaking heart, but for the greater good, he had to endure. Later, Broomhilda was brought to the dentist's room looking beautiful. To avoid eavesdropping, the dentist spoke to her in German and asked her to remain calm no matter what she saw. Just as Broomhilda was still bewildered, the door slowly opened, and Django appeared glistening. The couple, separated for so long, finally met again. Seeing Django like this, Broomhilda fainted from joy. The next plan still had to proceed. During dinner, the dentist presented a list of fighters he wanted to buy and argued with Candie about it for a while. In reality, he didn't care whom Candie sold, he only cared about how to take Django's wife along. At this moment, Django was trying to suppress the joy of reuniting with his wife, pretending to discuss the selection of fighters at the table. However, Broomhilda, in her role as a female slave, couldn't hide her excitement. During this time, she kept looking at Django meaningfully. This action was quickly detected by the butler. So he pulled Broomhilda into the kitchen to interrogate her. Although the answers were all denials, he didn't give up. At the dinner table, to continue stabilizing Candie, Django deliberately lowered the price. The dentist took that opportunity to raise the price. The two coordinated smoothly and successfully closed the deal for $12,000. However, the transaction would happen 5 days later. Facing such a huge sum, Candie was naturally very happy. Just after finishing the business discussion, he wanted to find some fun. So, under the butler's instigation, Broomhilda's clothes were stripped off in front of everyone. Her back, full of scars, was immediately exposed. To Candie, such a back represented his achievement. Seeing this scene, Django was so angry he wanted to draw his gun, but for the greater good, he once again suppressed his rage. Luckily, Candie's sister appeared in time, ending this farce. However, observing Django's reaction, the butler further confirmed his speculation. So he dragged Broomhilda into the kitchen to interrogate her again, asking what exactly her relationship was with the guy out there. Back at the table, the dentist finally stated his true purpose: "Now that the big business is done, why don't you sell that black female slave to me as well?" Hearing this, Candie didn't refuse. On the contrary, he was secretly happy about getting another large sum. But just as the result was about to be finalized, the butler suddenly barged in, interrupted everyone's conversation, and called Candie into the library for a private talk. In the library, the butler and Candie sat opposite each other, holding glasses of wine. As an elder, he advised Candie, "Their goal isn't the fighters, but that female slave. From my observation, she is very likely Django's wife." At this moment, Candie suddenly realized he had been tricked. But with his cruel nature, the most important thing was to hide his thoughts. When he returned to the dining table, he had an extra box in his hand. Opening it, inside was a skull. Its owner was an old black slave, older even than the butler, who had served Candie's ancestors. So Candie put business aside and insinuated about the servile nature of black people. He said bluntly, "This dead butler shaved my grandfather for decades. Every time he held the razor, he had the chance to kill his master. Yet, until he died, he never did. The only reason is the vile slave nature ingrained in his bones." Then Candie took out the old butler's occipital bone for everyone to see. According to him, all black people were born slaves. Saying this, He suddenly exposed the dentist and Django's conspiracy and ordered his subordinates to confiscate their guns. Next, he dragged Broomhilda to his side, declaring she was his property to deal with as he pleased. After speaking, Candie raised a hammer, pretending he wanted to kill Broomhilda. However, a merchant is a merchant after all. He immediately changed his tone, demanding the dentist pay a high price to buy back this female slave. If he didn't agree, they might have to take a bullet. The dentist had to obediently hand over his wallet and sign the contract for $12,000. After that, Candie acted like a victor, while the dentist sat silently in his chair without saying a word. Hearing the harp playing as if mocking him, the dentist walked alone into Candie's library. On the bookshelf were many works by Alexandre Dumas. Many of the slaves' names here were taken from there. It seemed Candie was a passionate fan of Alexandre Dumas. Since he couldn't use force to solve it, the dentist used words to provoke Candie's spirit. The dentist said bluntly, Alexandre Dumas was black. Hearing this sentence, the smile on Candie's face gradually disappeared. Not only that, the dentist added, I and others use German to say goodbye to show respect, but today I will use English to say goodbye to you. Humiliated like that, Candie certainly wouldn't let the dentist leave easily. So he ordered his subordinates to block the dentist, saying there was a rule here, after completing a transaction, both sides must shake hands. But the dentist refused this request. To him, shaking hands with Candie was no different from being an accomplice with him. However, in Candie's eyes, the dentist was just a loser who dared not accept the truth. Out of pride, he forced the dentist to actively shake his hand, or else he would kill Broomhilda. The dentist was a tough man, not easily subdued. But in this situation, he had to pretend to agree. However, as he stepped forward, the dentist quickly pulled out a pocket pistol. Before Candie could react, a bullet lodged straight into his heart. Seeing this, the butler was the first to rush over, hugging Candie and crying miserably. On the other side, the subordinates reacted and hurriedly opened fire. A shot sent the dentist flying. In an instant, the situation spiraled completely out of control. Seeing his friend killed, Django took the opportunity to grab a gun and began a crazy slaughter. With every gunshot, white men fell one by one. This place seemed to have become Django's own stage. At this point, Django had completely lost control. Even having to fight many people alone, he didn't flinch. Not long after, almost all the white men were wiped out by him. However, the butler took the opportunity to order men to capture Broomhilda. Forced by circumstances, Django had to obediently surrender. Not long after, Django was stripped naked and hung upside down from a beam. Not only that, a white man intended to use a knife to castrate him. Just at the moment hanging by a thread, the butler appeared in time to stop it. But he didn't come to beg for mercy. Being black himself, he knew a crueler punishment. Instead of letting Django die a quick death, why not sell him to the white miners? Waiting for him would be days of living a life worse than death, suffering constantly, working exhaustively in the mines every day until he died of exhaustion. But the old man underestimated Django's intelligence. On the way to his new master, Django didn't even have the right to sit in the wagon. He could only walk behind, pulled by a rope held by the guard on the wagon. If one looked closely, this was clearly preparation to send Django to meet his end. While resting, Django took the initiative to strike up a conversation with the guards. Seeing they knew nothing about what he had done, Django began to brainwash them. I'm just a bounty hunter. I accidentally wandered onto the farm while chasing a target, and as a result, they captured me as a slave. After speaking, Django took out the previous bounty warrant and fabricated a story about the criminal. The three guards were half convinced, half doubting Django's deception. Then Django unleashed his final move, just let me go do the mission. After it's done, I can give you the entire bounty of tens of thousands of dollars. Under the temptation of money, the guards finally couldn't help but be moved. At this time, the black slave being transported on the same wagon also began to chime in. When he arrived, he really was riding a horse and wearing a gun, with a white dentist accompanying him. Hearing this news, the 3 guards finally decided to trust Django. Not only did they agree to go on the mission with him, but they also gave him a gun and a horse. Unexpectedly, as soon as he got the gun, Django acted and sent 2 of them on their way. Immediately after, the 3rd one reacted but was also shot dead on the spot. Having dealt with the guards, Django regained his freedom once again. The black slave being transported on the wagon was astonished by this scene. Django walked to the wagon decisively, mounted a swift horse, took a rifle, loaded it with dynamite, and charged straight back onto his path of revenge. Galloping on horseback, Django felt the taste of true freedom for the first time. At this time, Broomhilda was being held in a shed. The white men guarding the plantation gate were casually playing cards. Along with the sound of dogs barking loudly in the distance, Django pushed the door and walked in. After a brutal assault, all the guards were easily dealt with. Then Django found the dentist's body, retrieved Broomhilda's purchase papers, and took a moment to mourn his late friend. Next, Django rescued Broomhilda, who was being held captive. But it wasn't over yet. Django lay in ambush inside the mansion. Waiting until Candie's close associates returned from the cemetery, Django calmly appeared upstairs. A few shots took down all of Candie's subordinates and his family. Seeing the black slaves trembling in fear, Django didn't hunt them down but let them go. At this moment, only the loyal old butler remained in the room. The current situation was closely related to him. The ridiculous thing was that the 2 of them called each other Black Dog, as if they weren't of the same race. The butler threw away his cane. It turned out that for so many years, he had always pretended to be crippled to look harmless. The reason he dared to be so calm was that he was sure Django's gun was out of bullets. But what he didn't expect was that Django had another gun. Django chose not to shoot him dead immediately but shot him twice in the legs, making him a real cripple. Although lying on the ground groaning continuously, the old butler continued his karmic cursing. Just like how the butler had treated him before, Django didn't give him a quick death but lit the fuse of the dynamite hidden beforehand. Then, Django turned and walked out decisively, enjoying the masterpiece brilliant as blooming fireworks. Waiting until everything had settled, Django took Broomhilda onto the path of freedom. At this moment, Django was finally completely liberated. Django Unchained is an American action drama film written and directed by Quentin Tarantino, starring Jamie Foxx and Leonardo DiCaprio, released in 2012. The most interesting and subtle point in the film is having a German dentist rescue black slaves in the American South. This contrasting image contributed to highlighting the film's theme powerfully. The dentist represents rationality in civilization. He is like a knight acting for justice. Django represents the rationality of savage collision. In fact, Django underwent 2 liberations, once liberated from the plantation which was like a prison, and once liberating himself in his soul. In the first stage of liberation, he still hadn't escaped the limitations of a slave's mentality. He endured the slave owners who bullied him and his family. Therefore, when facing white people who had no grudge against him, he still held an attitude of fear and deference. But after the dentist's death, Django entered the stage of self-liberation for his soul. At this time, he was completely transformed. Facing the white men escorting him, he could turn around and shoot them dead without hesitation, and could calmly blow up a white man's house. Even with the old butler, a black man like himself, Django no longer showed mercy. The dentist was not only the liberator of Django's body but also the guide for his soul to be free. It was the dentist who taught Django the correct perception of his identity. In reality, the one liberated was not just Django alone. He represents those who have escaped the yoke of slavery, and simultaneously represents the brutal slave system behind it. Therefore, Django Unchained is, on one hand, a liberation for the individual Django, and on the other hand, through Django's story, it will surely awaken even more black people. Eventually, they will be liberated. However, hidden behind these bloody scenes is a message about the pursuit of freedom, about the struggle against injustice. Whether bound physically or imprisoned mentally, as long as we dare to resist, we will all be liberated. The value of a movie lies in its reputation, and the value of a movie review lies in the feeling. The story ends here today. Thank you for watching. What do you think of this movie? Please comment below.